So the first chapter is chapter 7. We're going to discuss film. So I'm hoping that we'll get an opportunity on campus to get, I'll definitely bring some film up from Dental Assisting Lab and let you guys open a film pack and see what's inside of it. It's so much easier when you actually see it if you've never worked with it before than it is to kind of try to describe what they look like. But this, we're going to go through and do the best we can with this. And then when we get in lab, I'll bring some in lab and let you guys kind of open one up and see what's inside of an actual film pack. So we're going to define what film is composed of. We are going to talk about latent image formation, which you guys, we talked about the latent period and radiation exposure. And I mentioned to you guys the other day in our review that with film, that latent image is the image that's on the film until you process it. So you can't see it. That doesn't mean it's not there. It's there, but we don't see it until it's processed. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about the different types of intraoral, extraoral, and image or film, as well as duplicating film and their differences. And then we'll talk about film storage and protection. So film is composed of 4 basic components. First, there's the base. Then there's an adhesive layer on both sides of that base that helps that emulsion to stick to both sides for intraoral film and extraoral film. And then there's a protective layer placed on top of that to help prevent scratching. So if you were to look at a piece of film, this is kind of blown up, you can see that in the center where it's kind of a bluish green, that is the base of the film, which is kind of a polyester. And then on both sides, because our film that we use for x-rays is double emulsed. So it has the same thing on both sides of that film base. So on both sides, we've got adhesive, and then we've got emulsion on both sides, and we've got a protective layer on both sides. She wasn't. Okay. Get us to the next. There we go. Okay, so we're going to break it down. Each component, the film base is about 2.2 millimeters thick, and it's a piece of polyester plastic, and it provides strength and a stable support for that emulsion to stick to. Then, like I said, there's like that sticky adhesive layer, and the purpose of that is to attach the emulsion to the base. And then the film emulsion, I don't know if you guys have ever had this, you might be too young, but when we would go to picnics with my grandparents and stuff, people would take Jell-O and they would put like fruit floating in the Jell-O. And to me, that is what I picture with film emulsion. So maybe they've cut up bananas and strawberries, and then that Jell-O solidifies, and all of that fruit is kind of suspended in the Jell-O. So with film emulsion, what we've got is we've got that gelatin suspension, and then there's a bunch of silver halide crystals that are placed in that emulsion. And the different speeds of film have different sizes of silver halide crystals. The larger the crystal, the faster the film. The smaller the crystal, or the silver halide crystal, the smaller, the more detailed the film. So I just kind of think of that, in your guys's terminology, if you go to buy a television and you buy a television that is 720 pixels versus one that is 1020 pixels, the one that has more pixels, or the 1020, is going to give you a much more crisp, defined, nice picture, whereas the one that's 720 might be less expensive, but it's not going to give you as clear a picture. So that's kind of with film. The larger the crystals, the faster the film, so that's good because it reduces your patient dose. but sometimes we don't get the detail that we would like to get. So that's why there's F-speed film. If we're using film today, that's the fastest film that can be used. And they could make film that's far faster, but you're going to be far better as far as sharpness, but you're going to be exposing your patient to a lot more radiation in order to expose that film. I didn't mean to say faster. It's not going to be faster. If we have more crystals, it's going to be slower, but it's going to be a better picture. So film emulsion is that gelatin. That gelatin is used to suspend those silver halide crystals. And those silver halide crystals are what absorbs the radiation during exposure, and it stores the energy that is given off by those X-rays. Oops. And this is what emulsion kind of looks like. So you see the gelatin and all the little pieces floating around. So then on top of that, to protect that, there's a thin protective coating over the emulsion so that hopefully it will protect it from scratches, or if it's put up next to something, pressure, things like that. So that emulsion is, or that protective layer is to protect it. All right. Then we've got, like I said, the latent image formation is where those silver halide crystals, all of them contain different levels of stored energy that they've received from the X-ray. So depending on the density of the object that the X-rays are going through. So example, X-rays are coming through, some of it hits my gum tissue, and some of it hits my tooth, and some of it hits an amalgam that I might have in that tooth. The amalgam is going to absorb it all, so none of that X-ray is going to hit a silver halide crystal. Some of it will hit the enamel of my tooth, which is going to absorb an awful lot of it, but a little is going to go through. And then some of it's going to hit my soft tissue, which is going to let a lot more through, which is going to give its energy to those silver halide crystals. So now I have that latent image on that film, which will be seen when it's chemically processed. So when those X-ray photons strike the emulsion, some of the silver halide or bromide, you're going to hear them talk about both, some of those crystals are exposed, but some are not. So the exposed crystals are ionized by that radiation, which separates the silver and bromide atoms. And the irregularities in the lattice structure of those exposed crystals, and there's also little sensitivity specks that attract those silver atoms. All of that's what's going to create our image. These aggregates or groups of neutral silver atoms are known as latent image centers. Okay. And you can there's some images in your book too that will show this, and that is on page 62, where it shows those little sensitivity sites and the silver and bromide atoms being kind of energized by the X-rays. And then it shows what happens after that X-ray photon comes in, hits, knocks out an electron, which affects that sensitivity site, which is going to give our film its density. Okay, so there are different types of dental X-ray film, which we have talked about a little bit in lab. The only one of these that we haven't talked about is duplicating film. So intraoral film comes in a sealed pack. Extraoral film does not, and it's handled a little bit differently. And intraoral and extraoral film are both double emulsed. They have that emulsion on both sides. Duplicating film is exactly what it says it is. So back in the day, before we had digital, if we needed to send a copy of a patient's X-rays with them, rather than sending them our only copy, we had a duplicator that is only single emulsed, and it will make a copy. There's like I think of it as a little tanning bed, and you lay the duplicating film in there a specific way with the emulsion side up, I believe, and you lay the other x-rays that you're trying to duplicate on top of that, and it's actually exposed by light. It actually creates the image by being exposed to light. I see that, Megan, you're saying that Anna is trying to get back in the meeting. I don't, okay.
Did you find it?
Yeah, I think I got it.
Okay.
Thank you for letting me know.
Yep, you're welcome.
Okay, so let's get back here. Okay, so the intraoral film packaging, it's covered with like a plastic coating, and that is to protect that film that's held inside from light and moisture. And you can see this box here. This is how they came packaged. They have 25, 100 to 150 films in a box, depending on how you buy them. They are labeled on the outside with the type of film they are, the film speed, the size of film, and the number of films per packet. Because in our clinic, before we switched from film, we bought double packets so that we didn't have to make a duplicator or duplicate them on a duplicating machine. There were actually 2 packets in each little envelope of film. The expiration date is also noted on the outside of film, and it was always very important to rotate your film as you got new stock in and put the oldest towards the front, so that as we took new film out, we were using up the older film. And that's important with anything that we're using in clinic. We want to try to make sure that we are rotating our stock. Okay, so film packets have 4 components. There's the x-ray film, there's a black paper film wrapper, there's a lead foil sheet, and then, like I said, that moisture barrier or that outer packing. And this is what components of film look like. So if you were to open up a film and pull out what you see on the inside, you can see that black paper that wraps the dental film. Then there's lead foil backing, and the purpose of the lead foil is to absorb backscatter radiation. And then that kind of pink is that outer package that protects all of the contents. Let me see here. I think maybe, no, I got it. Okay. So they can come in a 1 film or 2 film. Like I said, we used to use the double film so that we didn't have to make duplicates. They are double emulsed. All of our intraoral, all of our extraoral are double emulsed. You want to remember that. There's an identification dot on the actual film package. And if you look at this image on page 63, it's much bigger than it is on my PowerPoint. The identification dot is on the tube side of the film packet. And so when we learn to mount x-rays, which you guys are going to do with real x-rays, you want to have a dimple. So you want that bump to stick out. You don't want it to be concave. You want it to be convex. You want a dimple, or I'm sorry, you want a pimple, not a dimple. So you want the pimple to stick out. You don't want it to be like a dimple and dip in. The purpose of the identification dot is so that we mount our x-rays correctly. Because if you flip them the other way, now you're looking at the mouth in a completely different orientation. So that is the whole purpose of the identification dot on film, was so that we made sure that everybody was mounting their films correctly. That way, when the doctor looks at the films, he's working on the correct tooth. If you have them mounted in a way that's unfamiliar to the doctor, or if everybody mounts them different, you could see how that could be very easy for him to work on the wrong tooth or extract the wrong tooth. So we want to make sure that everybody is mounting the same way. Okay, so the protective black sheet of paper is to protect that film from light. And it's actually one piece that wraps all the way around the film and then has a little flap over the top. Then, like I said, there's the lead foil sheet that is located behind the film that is wrapped in that black paper. And it shields that film from any backscattered or secondary radiation, because if that was allowed to come back and hit the film, it would create fog on the film. It would make the film less diagnostic. So pay attention to, if you look at this piece of lead, you can see the little dots that run in lines. If you were to take and put your film in your XCP holder, because they make XCP holders for film too, but if it was placed backwards so that your lead foil was facing the source of radiation, your picture or your image would come out with an imprint, which they call like a herringbone or tire tracks on. You could see it real lightly on the image, and your image would appear much lighter because now the x-rays are going through that foil before they hit the image, or the image receptor, the actual film. So it's going to be lighter because that's going to absorb a lot of the x-rays, and it's also going to leave that imprint of those little dotted lines on your lead foil. And if you look at this image, it shows you exactly what that looks like. The other thing, if we're all mounting our x-rays with a pimple, this film would be backwards. When you go to mount, you've taken this film flip-flopped. So in order for it to be orientated correctly in your mount, it's going to be a dimple rather than a pimple in order to fit in your puzzle, if that makes sense. So the outer package wrapping is this soft vinyl paper that's used to seal the contents and protect from moisture. The label side that has this tab on it, that is how we open the film, and that is where your lead foil is. The plain white side, which is the flip-flop of this, that doesn't have any writing or anything on it, that is the side that you want towards your source of radiation. Okay, we talked about this in lab. We've got periapical, bite wing, and occlusal. Periapical, like I stated, was used to examine the entire tooth and 2 to 3 millimeters of the supporting bone below the apex of the tooth. The bite wing, used to examine crowns of both maxillary and mandibular teeth all on one film. The main purpose is to examine those interproximal surfaces. We can use the little sticky bite wing tabs. They make loops that go all the way around a film or a sensor, or we can use our XCP holding device, which is the preferred. An occlusal film is a larger film used to examine that whole area of the maxilla or mandible. This is a size 4 film, which I told you we don't see those much. They do make them in PSP plates, but I've not seen a sensor like this. So you guys will probably never encounter a 4. We are going to practice with the number 2 on Dexter, taking occlusals, and typically in our clinic, the only time we use these is for children. The different sizes of films we went over in lab as well last week. The sensors that we have are size 0, which are used for pedo bite wings. Size 2 is used for pedo occlusals and mixed dentition on older children, as well as our periapicals and bite wings on adults. The other sizes, the 1, 3, and 4, we don't have in our clinic, but they are available. The number 1 was used for the anterior teeth in adults in a narrow arch. And like I said, that number 4 was used for adult occlusals. The number 3 was the one I showed you guys in lab. If you remember, that was longer, and it was supposed to give us 1 bite wing on each side in an adult rather than having to take 4 in the whole mouth. but it caused a lot of overlap because you couldn't compensate for the curve of the mouth with that. Okay, intraoral film speed we've touched on. So film speed is the amount of radiation that's going to be required to produce a radiograph of standard density on a piece of film, which is determined by the size of the silver halide crystals. The bigger the crystal, the faster the film. The smaller the crystal, it's going to take more radiation, but it's going to give you a much more crisp, detailed image. The thickness of the emulsion also plays into the speed of the film. Sometimes they will have special radiosensitive dyes that help aid in film speed as well. So a fast film basically means that it requires less radiation to expose the film and obtain an image. Film speed ratings range from A to F. A is the slowest, F is the fastest. F should be all that's being used today if people are still using film. Extraoral film is exactly what it states. It's placed outside of the mouth during an exposure. So that would be like a panoramic x-ray or a cephalometric x-ray. And these are used to examine large areas of the teeth and jaw all on one image. Here's a pano. Gives us a nice wide view of the whole mouth, the upper, the lower. We can see the sinuses. We can see the temporomandibular joint. All of the supportive bone around the teeth. You can see unerupted teeth, erupted teeth. So these are really nice. This is a cephalometric image, which shows us not only the bony tissues of the profile, but it also can show you the outline of the soft tissue. These are used in ortho a lot. And this is what extraoral film packaging looks like. These boxes contained quantities of 50 to 100 films. This had to be opened under a dark room situation because if you open that box, the intraoral films are all wrapped in that moisture-proof barrier. This is not. There is a black sleeve inside that you have to open up. It's like a bag that contains all of the film. There's a piece of cardboard on the outside of the whole stack of film to kind of protect them from compression. And then you actually pull out just the raw piece of film, and then they go inside of a metal or a flexible vinyl cassette or film holding sleeve. So extraoral film is not wrapped in the moisture barrier and all of that. So it has to be loaded or placed in its little cassette under dark room conditions. There are a couple different types of extraoral films as well. There's screen film and non-screen film. Screen film requires the use of a screen in a cassette with phosphors for exposure. This is what our pano film is. The film itself is sensitive to the light that is created when X-rays hit that screen. It causes the phosphor crystals to fluoresce, and that light is what exposes the film. So the actual X-rays themselves don't. It's the phosphor crystals on that screen that luminesce and cause that light to expose the film. And each film is sensitive. You can select different types. Some of them are sensitive to blue and some of them are sensitive to green light. So the screens you have to match the kind of film that you purchase to the type of screen that is in your cassette. Non-screen film does not require the use of a screen, and these are exposed directly to X-rays, and this is not used in dentistry. This would be used like in the X-rays we took in the hospital. So for extraoral film equipment, there are those intensifying screens, And those can be found inside of a metal cassette or a flexible vinyl. It's like a big long envelope that has these screens that slide down inside of it, that the screens are going to be on either side of your screen film. So if you look at this image, let me see, in your book, if you're looking at page 68, up at the upper left side of page 68, figure 718 is showing a metal cassette. And then to the right, you can see that long black vinyl kind of envelope. And that gentleman is pulling out the screens that slide down inside of that envelope. That's the same thing, only it's just flexible. Some of the old piano machines had a drum that flexible vinyl sleeve would wrap around. And then the newer units have just a flat side of the X-ray tube that the hard metal cassette would slide into. So it's just different types of piano machines require different types of cassettes. So we've got our screen film, and then we place it between the intensifying screens. So you have to have intensifying screens on both sides of your extraoral film because it's double emulsed. So we need those phosphor crystals to be located on both sides of the film, and so that we can expose the film just like we do with intraoral film. So like I stated, those intensifying screens transfer the X-ray energy into visible light, and that visible light is what exposes that film. By doing it this way and not using direct X-ray like we see in non-screen film in the hospital, this is a much lower dose to your patient. It requires less X-ray to create that light, which then exposes the screen film, than it would if we were shooting direct X-ray energy at that film. That screen film is secured in a cassette between those two intensifying screens of matching size. And remember, if it's blue, if it's a blue screen, we've got to have that blue tinted film. Everything's got to match. The intensifying screens are smooth plastic sheet. If you look at that image on page 68, you can see the white on the lid as well as the bottom part of the cassette. And it just looks like a piece of plastic. But that plastic is coated with those fluorescent crystals known as phosphor crystals. This image is on the same page 68, and it shows what happens when those phosphors inside that intensifying screen emit that light that is caused by the X-ray photons striking that intensifying screen. So the light photons then will bounce off and strike the film, and that's exposing the film, and it's going to be at varying levels again, based on the structure that those X-rays are going through before they hit those phosphor crystals. So if it's going through a patient's body before it hits that, again, only a certain amount of X-rays are going to be allowed through. Some are going to pass without interaction. Some are going to be slightly absorbed. Some are going to be completely absorbed. So that's what's going to create our image on this extraoral film as well. The cassette itself is just either the hard metal cassette or that flexible vinyl cassette that is used to hold the film and those intensifying screens together. It must be light tight, and it must hold that intensifying screen tight to the film. That's something that we check on those for maintenance. Is on the hard cassette, we want to make sure that they maintain, there's like spongy stuff under those screens that hold them so that they squeeze really tight against the film. And in the vinyl, the biggest thing is static electricity, because you're sliding it in and out of that vinyl. And especially in the winter when it was really dry, we would have to clean those screens with special cleaner and anti-static so that that static didn't create artifacts on our film. The rigid cassette allows those photons to pass through, and then the back cover of that is metal, which helps reduce scatter. These cassettes are marked with an L and an R so that remember we talked about the identification dot on the little intraoral films? On our cassette, there is an L and an R at the very bottom of corners, so that when you take that image and you pull it out, it's marked, so you know left and right. Otherwise, it would be really easy again to have it incorrectly oriented, and it could cause the dentist to work in the wrong area. Here's the piano cassette with those intensifying screens I was talking about. That gray piece that's laying there is an exposed piece of film. And then you can see the white pieces of plastic on the lid and the base of that cassette. Those are the intensifying screens. I don't require you to know the kinds, but just we talked about that some of them are specific to blue light, some are specific to green light. So you want to make sure your film and your intensifying screens match. We're going to talk about duplicating film last. This is different than radiographic film. It's, like I said, it's used to make copies of images that have already been taken. The longer it is exposed to light, the lighter the film will become. This is completely the opposite for intraoral and extraoral. Remember, light falls on that electromagnetic spectrum. With typical intraoral and extraoral film, the longer you expose it to light, the darker it becomes, because those silver halide crystals are absorbing every bit of that energy. So your entire image would be black if it's exposed to light. With duplicating film, it's the opposite. The longer we expose it to light, the lighter the film becomes. Why did we need to make duplicates? Well, for referrals, if we're sending a patient to an oral surgeon, we took a piano, we can make a duplicate of that so that they don't have to be radiated again when they go there. Also, insurance claims require x-rays many times, so that was another reason. Remember that it has emulsion on only one side. And in order for a piece of duplicating film to be exposed, you have to have that duplicating machine, which, like I said, is like a tanning bed to me. It looks like a tanning bed for film. It's about the size of a full mouth set of x-rays or a piano. And you just put the duplicating film in there. You lay the film that you want to duplicate in there. You shut it, and it's got a timer. And you set the timer so that it exposes that film to that light for a specific time. This needs to be done in a dark room again, so that that duplicating film is not exposed to light. Because if it does, your film's going to be light before you even put an image on it. So you set it for a specific time, walk away, come back, it's done. Or you could just stand there. It doesn't take very long at all to duplicate. And again, they come in different sizes. They come in a box just like extraoral film. It's not wrapped in it's got a black sheet or bag around it, but then it's just individual duplicating film pieces inside of that. Film storage and protection. It is very important to make sure film is not stored in a room where x-rays are being taken all the time, because they'll pick up scatter in the room from the x-rays that are being exposed. So it's negatively affected by heat, it's humidity, and radiation. So we want to always keep our film in a cool, dry place and make sure that we're paying attention to those expiration dates. Okay.